think we just got it started. All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and ask you to kind of introduce yourself a little bit so we can see who's here. And I'm going to put the question into the chat. So you could just type your answer into the chat. Just introduce yourself with your name, where you teach, or if you're not a teacher, what organization you work for, what subject you teach, and what you're hoping to get out of today's climate chat. And then I'll probably pop that back into the chat a couple times because people are still coming in, so. Joyce, did you want me to say anything else too?
So I'm up here in the box that says Science Hawaii. My name is Joyce Haas. I'm a 6th grade teacher at Kaunakakai School over on the island of Molokai. And the reason why my video's off is that I have a pretty low bandwidth and I'm like the one who's facilitating the Zoom for the meeting. So I'm afraid that I'm going to glitch out. Okay, everybody. So I'm not camera shy. I will give you a viewing of me. So here I am in my Santa's hat, and I'm really excited to have you all here. We're going to learn about fish. We're going to learn a whole lot about the ocean, and I'm really excited to introduce our guest speaker. Now I'm going to turn off my video because I don't want to glitch us all out. Okay, so the first thing that's happening is you're introducing yourselves, and then the next thing is we're going to launch a quick little poll. And if you could answer the poll, that will give a few minutes to those people who are joining a little late. And then after that, we'll get started with our guest speakers. Okay, soon you're going to see a poll coming your way. Let's see. There it is. Now we may launch another poll question later in the climate chat, but for now we just wanted to warm everybody up. And I'm so happy you are all able to join us. Okay, give me a thumbs up. Can you see the responses, the poll responses? If you can see them, give me a thumbs up. If not, then it's just me who can see them. All right, thank you very much, Fitz. All right. Laura, do you want to end the poll and kind of show everybody the responses? Looks like ahi is the most popular fish. Okay. For eating here in Hawaii, but we have others that are right behind. Okay, I'm going to introduce our first guest speaker today, and her name is Phoebe Woodworth-Jefcoats. And I'd like to introduce her and thank her for agreeing to speak with us. She's going to join us today, and she is going to tell us a little bit about the impacts from climate change on fish and fisheries. Personally, I'm very excited about the topic. Phoebe is a research oceanographer with the Pacific Islands Fisheries Science Center, and she's in the Ecosystem Sciences Division. She works on pelagic research, and there is a pelagic research program there. Among other topics, she studies questions like how will climate change impact the North Pacific food web? And that touches all the edges of the Pacific and should be relevant for all of us. Just a little backstory on Phoebe. She's always been interested in science, even as a child, and she conducted experiments for fun. As an undergrad, she studied weather, and then she moved on to oceanography after she participated in a research cruise. She enjoys composting, gardening, and she does paper crafts. That's always fun, especially at Christmas time. So everybody, please welcome Phoebe Woodworth-Jefcoats. She's our first speaker.
Hi, thanks so much for the introduction. Like Joy said, I'm Phoebe, and one of the topics that my colleagues and I work on a lot is looking at how we can use information about the present day climate to understand more about our fisheries and then project how climate change may impact our fisheries. And since ahi's really a popular fish here, and especially with this crowd today, it works out really well because for today's talk, I'm going to really focus in specifically on ahi. So it's nice that we all like to eat it. That's handy. And thanks to Celeste for doing the slides since I'm having some technical difficulties here, but you can go to the next slide. So I'll start out by talking about just Hawaii's longline fishery for ahi and where ahi fit into that fishery. And then I'll look at some work that we're doing in sort of a forecasting short-term time frame and then looking out at climate change. So the Hawaii's fishery for ahi is a longline fishery, and it is a limited entry fishery. You have to have a permit to participate in this commercial fishery. And in 2020, there were 146 vessels that participated, and together they set a collective 60 million hooks in the North Pacific Ocean. And if you're not familiar with the gear, the way this longline gear works is the vessel sets out anywhere from like 30 to 40 nautical miles of line behind the fishing vessel. And this is just a little schematic diagram. And this line is interspersed with anywhere from 50 to 100 floats. And in between each of those floats, there's about 20 or 30 hooks. And then that stretches on for miles and miles. And those hooks are set up in the line to fish pretty deep in the ocean. They fish anywhere from about 300 to 1,300 feet below the ocean surface. And that's just because during the daytime when they're setting this gear, that's where big eye are in the water column. The fishery occupies a pretty large footprint. It's over 6 million square miles of the North Pacific, and you can see that in the map on the right-hand side there. And the next slide. So if we think about Hawaii's fishery and the fishery that lands here in Honolulu, we compare that to other fisheries in the United States and other commercial fishing ports, we tend to think of this fishery as a high value, low volume fishery. So if we look at the dollar value of all the fish that are landed here in Honolulu, that just means fishing vessels came in and they offloaded here and sold the fish here. Honolulu's fishery landings are valued at about $76 million. And if we compare that to other commercial fishing ports in the United States, we rank pretty high. We're 8th in the United States. But in terms of the volume of fish or the total weight of fish that comes through Honolulu, we rank much lower, about 25th in the United States with 25 million pounds of fish. And so you can see it's a really valuable fishery, but it's not lots and lots of fish. And big eye tuna and tuna in general are really important to this fishery. About 47% of all the tuna landings in the United States come here through Honolulu. And then sticking with that theme of high value, about 60% of the US tuna landings revenue come from Honolulu's fishery. And we can zero in to look at just how important ahi is to that fishery. So if we look at all the fish that are caught in this fishery, whether they keep the fish and put it on the boat and bring it back and sell it, or they throw it back in the ocean, ahi are only about 20% of those fish. If we look at all the fish they retain, it increases to about 37% of all the fish. If we switch from looking at just numbers of fish and we weigh those fish instead, it jumps up to 63% of the total catch weight is ahi, because these are big fish. And then again, they're really valuable fish. About 74% of the ex-vessel revenue from Honolulu's fishery is for ahi. So again, ahi is a really important species in this fishery. And even though it's really an important species, they are facing an uncertain future. If we look at stock assessments, which are scientific studies that are done to understand the status of a stock, whether we can fish more or less in the future, in the past decade, ahi has intermittently been identified as experiencing overfishing. And even in the years when they don't find that the stock is being overfished or experiencing overfishing, they do note that there's really substantial uncertainty about the status of the stock, and that if they were to make different scientific assumptions, that they might not come to the conclusion that the stock was stable and sustainably fished. So it's an important species, but we have a lot of questions about it. So that's why we spend a lot of time working on it here at the Science Center. So you can go to the next slide, and we can start taking a look at what these catch rates look like over time. And when we study ahi catch rates, we tend to look at the number of fish that are caught for every 1,000 hooks that go in the water. And the reason that we use that measure is because it results in some nice round numbers that are easy to wrap our heads around. So if you look over the past 20 years or so, for every 1,000 hooks that the fishery puts in the water, we catch anywhere from about 2 to 5 ahi. And then another way we can look at this in the next slide is to look at the weight of all those fish. So we can either look at the number of fish per 1,000 hooks or the weight of fish per 1,000 hooks. And again, that ratio just gives us nice numbers that we can make sense of. And if you look at these two time series, they are very, very similar, even though one is weight and the other is numbers. And the reason for that is because most of the fish that are caught in this fishery are about 4 years old. And just like small humans grow along a kind of a set growth curve, and they're generally the same size at the same age, the same thing is true for ahi. So these 4-year-old fish are all within a similar size range, give or take a little bit. And that's why these time series look really similar. So one of the things that we did using this information is we got to thinking that if most of the fish that the fishery is catching are about 4 years old, maybe we could look at the oceanography in the region and try and understand what's happening in the ocean when those ahi are first feeding in the ocean. So when they're first these little larval and juvenile fish. So if you can go to the next slide. To do this, we turn to satellite data, because satellite data can see the entire ocean surface. They're up there all the time. We get tons of data from satellites. So on the left is sea surface chlorophyll, which gives us an estimate of phytoplankton in the ocean. If you see it like pretty far north up there, it's really green, and then down near Hawaii, it's really dark blue. There's a lot of phytoplankton really far north and a lot less here around Hawaii. We can also look at sea surface temperature, and that's just what it sounds like. It's the temperature of the sea surface. So if we put these two data sets together, we can actually get a pretty good estimate of the size of phytoplankton that are in the ocean where the fishery is operating. So if we go to the next slide, what we're looking at here is a time series of the estimated size of phytoplankton where the fishery operates. And when we talk about phytoplankton size, it's really teeny tiny amounts of carbon. And so it's hard to make sense of that size. So we think of them as perfect spheres, and we look at what that diameter of that sphere would be in micrometers. So for the past 20 years or so, the average size of phytoplankton where the fishery operates is just over 1 micrometer in diameter for that sphere. And so remember I said that those ahi are about 4 years old. So if we want to see what's happening in the ocean when the ahi that are caught are first in the ocean, we need to take these ocean conditions and kind of bump them forward 4 years. And we'll do that in the next slide. So that's the same time series, we just moved it 4 years along the time series. And then in the next slide, we can put that catch rate right back on top of what we're seeing. And so when we did this, we found there was a really impressive relationship between catch rates in a given year and what was happening in the ocean 4 years earlier. And it's not that big-eye tuna are eating phytoplankton. If we go to the next slide, what we think is happening is that big-eye tuna, when they're first feeding, they're eating little zooplankton. And when we have more of those large phytoplankton, that means we have better food for those zooplankton, and we have larger zooplankton. which means that there's more really good food for those larval and juvenile big eye tuna when they're first foraging in the environment. That's a really critical life stage for them. And if they have really good food, more of them survive and grow and go on to be caught by the fishery in larger sizes and at higher catch rates. And so using this relationship, in the next slide, we put together a forecast for the fishery and for fishery managers. And so the solid line is what was actually caught in a given year. And the dotted line is that forecast that allows us to look out again 4 years into the future, because whatever's happening this year, those fish are going to be caught 4 years later on average. And then the shading around that is just our kind of, for like 95% sure we'll be around there. So the goal with this forecast is this is hopefully information that managers can use. If we see that there's years where we have smaller phytoplankton, we would expect there to be fewer big eye tuna 4 years later. And so maybe we would need to catch fewer big eye, or the opposite if we have a lot of large phytoplankton. And then also hopefully this is information that those in the fishing industry and adjacent industries can use to try and make financial decisions for their companies. So if we're thinking of years where there might be more ahi or fewer ahi, if you're thinking of making investments in your vessel and you want to take time away from fishing, what year would be a good year to do that? So that's one of the things that we're working on using our understanding of today's climate. And then I'll just wrap up by talking about how we can use that to look at the impacts of climate change. And so to do this, we have to turn to climate and Earth system models because we're projecting what might happen in the future. And climate and Earth system models are basically mathematical representations of what's happening in the climate system. So they have a lot of information about the ocean and the atmosphere, what's happening on land, what humans are doing to put carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and other greenhouse gases, things like volcanoes, all of that goes in there, and that's projected out into the future. And then we can look at what we expect the ocean to be like in the future. And when we do that on the next slide, we can look at what we expect to see in that zooplankton community that the big eye tuna are feeding on. And when we look out towards the end of the 21st century and compare it to what we're seeing now, if we stay on this current course that we are with regard to what we're doing to address climate change, which is really not very much, we would expect there to be fewer and smaller zooplankton out in the ocean at the end of the century, anywhere from where the fishery operates for us, anywhere from about 20 to 35% fewer and smaller zooplankton. And so that means that there's less prey available to ahi in the future under our current trajectory for climate change. Next slide. We can also look at changes to ocean temperature. It won't really surprise anyone, I don't think, that we expect ocean temperatures to increase in the future. And if we look in the waters around Hawaii, that's anywhere from about 1 to 2.5 degrees Celsius. And the reason that rising ocean temperatures matter for ahi and other fish is that when the ocean gets warmer, fish's metabolism speeds up. So just to maintain the activity that they're doing now and growing at the rate that they're growing now, they actually have to eat more food. And that's just because it's sort of like a chemical reaction rate thing, that things just happen faster in a warmer environment. So that means all else being equal, when the ocean is warmer, ahi will require more food. And we just saw that we expect there to be less food available to them in the future. So in the next slide, we can take this output from these Earth system and climate system models and put them into ecosystem models. And just like climate models are a mathematical representation of the climate, we do the same thing for ecosystem models. We represent all these different species and prey groups mathematically, and we can estimate who's eating who and how much. And we can also include fishing scenarios in the model as well. So what we did is we took that Earth system model output, put it in our ecosystem models, and then we have to come up with fishing scenarios to do in the future. So we looked at a couple different scenarios. One was a no change in fishing, and we just kept doing exactly what we're doing now into the future. And then in the next slide, we looked at 2 scenarios where fishing mortality increases. So in the past 25 years or so, fishing effort has increased 5-fold in this fishery. So we looked at one scenario where over the rest of the century, that 5-fold increase continues. But not every hook that goes in the water catches a fish, so that could be like an overly aggressive scenario. So we also looked at just doubling fishing. And then in the next slide, we looked at complementary scenarios where we were to reduce fishing to half the present day and then 1/5 the present day. And in the next slide, we looked at what we would expect that to mean for the total weight of ahi that are caught in our fishery under climate change. So this is not the weight of a single ahi, but if we took all the ahi that are caught by our fishery in a given year, how we would expect that to change. And any of the lines that are down there in that gray shaded area are a decline in catch. And so what we found is that under climate change, in that scenario where fish need more food, but there's less food available, there's no fishing scenario in that climate scenario that allows catch to increase into the future. And there's no scenario that allows this fishery to catch more fish in the face of climate change. However, in the next slide, since we are using a computer model, we can estimate how much ahi there is left in the ocean after all that fishing happens every year. And so what we found there is that in scenarios where we reduced fishing mortality by half or 1/5, we actually, even though catch wasn't increasing, the amount of ahi in the ocean was actually able to increase in the face of climate change. And so I'll just wrap up with some closing thoughts on the last slide. So first, ahi are a really important species in our fishery, and our fishery is a really important tuna fishery for the country as a whole. And even though ahi are really important, they do face an uncertain future, both through their questionable stock status, as well as the effects of climate change on ahi. And so we can use our understanding of how ahi interact with their environment to estimate future forecasts for catch rates. So we can provide this information to managers and those in the industry so that they can make informed decisions about the next few years for our fishery. And then we can also use that same concept and that same type of understanding to project out for longer term scenarios for our fishery. And so that gives us an understanding of the presumed negative impacts of climate change on this fishery as ocean temperatures increase and there's less prey available to these fish. But one thing that I think is really encouraging is that we see that there's possible scenarios where even though we don't see an increase in catch, we do see some resilience in the ecosystem. And so that shows us that what we do with our fishery can really have a tangible impact on the ecosystem around us, and that our decisions of how we manage that fishery can be really important for the ecosystem. And with that, I will hand it back to our host, but I welcome your questions. I saw there was some chat coming in, and you're also welcome to email me if you think of stuff after today. So thanks.
I think we're the ones who should say thanks. Phoebe, that was great. I learned a whole lot. I see that there are a lot of people clapping right now. I'm going to try my video, everybody. All right. So Phoebe, that was a lot to learn. And it really shows, well, first thing I want to say, I can imagine that the scientific environment trying to collect all that data, that's a challenging environment out in the ocean. And one of the things I like so much is how clear your graphs are. The correlations are really clear. And I think sharing that with students, the students would be really interested in how you overlaid the graphs. So I wanted to say thank you. There's some questions in the chat. Okay, so one of the questions in the chat is, are there other fisheries near Hawaii's fishery for ahi?
So there are international fleets that fish. They don't fish within 200 miles of Hawaii because that is like United States territory and we don't let them fish there. But once you get outside that 200-mile range, then other countries can fish for ahi as well, and they do.
Yeah, I imagine so. Oh boy, there are lots of questions coming in. So to stay on
in the chat too.
Yeah, just stay on our time schedule. Missy's going to introduce our next speaker, and I want to let you all know, rest assured, we're going to try to do breakout sessions at the very end, and then you can choose one of our presenters and go into their breakout room. All right, go for it, Missy. Thank you so much, Phoebe. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Phoebe. So our next presenter is Celeste Hanley, and I'm going to give you a little bit of her bio now. Celeste comes from an education background. In her free time, she's interested in fiber arts, hollow weaving, and her 3 dogs. And she is really interested in local food, health, and sustainability. Celeste is an education and outreach specialist with the Pacific Islands Regional Office, serving Hawaii, American Samoa, the Northern Mariana Islands, and Guam. She has worked with NOAA Fisheries since 2019 and enjoys connecting students and the community with the natural resources in our care. Prior to joining NOAA, she worked with the U.S. Army's Natural Resources Program on Oahu and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Her background in education and international studies from Penn State University and experience working in the field to protect endangered species have given her a passion for lifelong learning and being outdoors. And now I'm going to hand the mic over to Celeste to share with us her presentation. Thanks, Celeste.
Great, thank you so much. And I'm just going to get my screen shared here, and if folks can be patient with me, we have a funny little setup here at our office now that we're back from the pandemic, and I'm still getting used to it, but it sounds like you can hear and see, so that's great. So yeah, I'm Celeste, as Melissa mentioned, and I'm really excited to just talk about how we can connect your students in the classroom with some of the fisheries management work that we do here at the Pacific Islands Regional Office, and just kind of taking a step back to understand kind of where Phoebe and I work for NOAA Fisheries. We have a really wide area of responsibility. So you hear the word fisheries in our name, right? And you think fish and maybe some other things that you might eat too. It could be, crabs, for example, or other species that are the foods that people eat. But our responsibility also connects with caring for protected species. So these critical animals in our ecosystem that are really important. So recovering endangered species, protecting marine mammals. And it also extends to all the places, the habitats where these fish and protected species live. And so for any of your students that are interested in marine science, fisheries is a really fun place to work. A lot of cool science that gets done, as you can see with Phoebe's work, and there's a lot of opportunities on the management side as well. And today I just wanted to introduce quickly a few games that our office developed. Some of my colleagues that were huge game fans were part of a leadership course and worked to really capture some of the core activities we do around sustainable fishing, fishing management, so that younger audiences could connect with this work. So I'll do my best to just touch on these as briefly as I can, because I know you have questions, and I'd be happy to share more information with you. I'll have my contact info at the end, and you'll receive these activity overviews too, so you can dig in a little further. But the target audience for these activities is really upper elementary school and lower middle. So, ideally like a 4th through 6th grade range, but you really can extend them beyond that, probably not lower, but you could certainly, particularly with this module and this module, extend it to even high school students across a wide variety of disciplines. So some of these are very interdisciplinary in nature and not just specifically science focused, which may be useful to you as well. And so I'm going to touch on each of these, and the first one will be Eyes on the Seas, which gets into the role of fisheries observers. The next one will be Where Does Your Poke Come From? And that is our international fisheries negotiation activity. And then Pacific Aquaculture Challenge, which talks about sustainable aquaculture in our region. So Eyes on the Seas, this is for exploring how fisheries observers support sustainable fishing. So has anybody heard of a fisheries observer out there? I'm just curious if you're familiar with this role in fisheries management. Couple have. I see some thumbs up. That's good that folks have. This is a lot of times like an entry-level job that young marine biologists will take on and go on to the high seas. We have some pretty rugged observer culture here in the region because we have some rough seas out there and really long trips. A couple of months at sea you could actually spend. But a fisheries observer is a professionally trained biological technician, and they're really collecting that first-hand catch and bycatch data from our U.S. commercial fishing and processing vessels. So some of that data that Phoebe used in her work was actually from the observer program, right? It does take a lot of time on the seas to gather this information. And so we have 100% coverage in some of our fisheries. We have 20% coverage in others. So we really have actually the highest for longline fishing in the region, the Pacific Islands region, observer coverage the U.S. does. So it's definitely something to be proud of and really critical to sustainability, because these folks are really our eyes and ears on the seas. So long before that poke bowl that you see there gets to your table, there's a lot of training, hook counting, measurements, and all of that goes into really capturing the data behind the catch. And that's really important. And so if you take away one message today, I really encourage you, kind of like Phoebe was suggesting, like our decisions do have an impact on our industry. And so if you do eat fish, if you enjoy poke, you want to choose fresh poke always, never frozen, because that fresh poke, that's the stuff that's regulated by NOAA. So we're using that Science Center is providing to make those decisions to manage these fisheries. And then you can also look at the label. So when you're at the grocery store, take a look and see where that fish is from, or even if you're at a restaurant, ask questions. It's really important to select stuff that's from the US. And that's kind of how the United States actually earned the reputation as a world leader in fisheries management. We'll talk a little more about that in the negotiation game next. So in this activity, Eyes on the Seas, your students would take part in a simulation on a fishing vessel. And this is really fun. I've adapted this for kind of shorter activities and longer ones where we actually have a whole presentation attached. All of these activities have presentations where you get that background for your students so you can be confident in sharing the information kind of behind what we'll be learning. But in the activity itself, each student will have a role. And typically we have it set up for 6 students per group. You could kind of break this down depending on the number of students you have in your classroom. I have a couple of kits that folks can actually borrow to have multiple vessels set up in the classroom. So the different roles include captain. So the captain's really the one responsible for picking the types of hooks that we're going to be setting. And that is important because the captain really gets to decide on the strategy for fishing. So they can have an aggressive strategy or they can have a more conservative strategy. And so with an aggressive strategy, they're probably going to catch more of the fish they want, things like big eye tuna, yellowfin, albacore, skipjack, or swordfish. But they're probably also going to be catching things that they don't really want to catch as well. So not only just, less valuable bycatch, things like ono, mahi-mahi, or opa, but they also might be catching protected species accidentally. And that's really important in this game because we want students to kind of learn about the significance of that. And so more on that in a bit. So the captain gets to choose the strategy. The crew is responsible for essentially setting the hooks that the captain picks. And instead of hooks, we set up a little long line simulation, the way you kind of saw Phoebe, had those lines. We actually use marine debris and some recovered fishing floats from, international fisheries. But anyway, we set up a little long line and the crew will actually set these little hooks based on how aggressive. So, the greens are more conservative, the reds or the magenta are more aggressive strategy. And that essentially tells the fish what they're going to bite. So you'll usually have about 2 fish per group. They're going to bite the hook. That determines the catch. And those are based on these cards. So the hook corresponds with the card deck that basically is aggressive or conservative, and the likelihood that you're going to get, protected species in one is greater than the other, and you'll catch maybe more target fish, but you also might lose the game because of protected species impacts. And losing the game means we close the fishery. So nobody wants that. And so it's really important to consider your strategy carefully to make sure that the fishery does stay open. And then finally, you have the role of the NOAA observer, which is the person responsible for identifying the fish and animals that bite the hooks. So they're going along with their data sheet. They're figuring out in each set, so we actually do 6 rounds or sets of this, what the crew caught, and they're recording that in their table. And then over time, they essentially get to see, what they actually achieved based on their strategy. And in subsequent sets, folks switch roles, and captains can kind of make a decision. Maybe you caught a lot of what you wanted, but you're getting really close on some thresholds for protected species, and your fishery is going to get closed, and that means no more fishing. You don't even get to go into set 3, 4, 5. And so they might want to reconsider how aggressive and maybe put some more conservative hooks out. That's really how we want them to fish. We don't want them to close the fishery and just try to max it out. And so you can kind of get some friendly competition among the groups with that too, as they choose their approach. And so at the end of this activity, students really understand the role of these fisheries observers in the sustainable fisheries management, really how the longline gear works, just kind of the basics of it. Not exact representation, but essentially how this fishing works. They'll get to identify those target species, and then along with non-target fish, and then bycatch, the stuff we don't want to catch. And then also how these fishing strategies, whether it's more or less aggressive, will impact potentially what fishermen will catch, and then how rules help keep our fisheries sustainable. And that's just really one of the most critical pieces that we want the students to hear. And in this activity, it's primarily focused on protected resources like sea turtles and a protected dolphin called a false killer whale. But really, all this rulemaking is important, even things like catch limits, and those are things you can explore and tools for fisheries management around this activity. And I'm going to jump into the next one to touch on a different topic, because that was focused primarily on the Hawaii longline fishery, where we have a lot of our observers. And this activity touches on international fisheries, and this is the one we're actually going to raffle off at the end. So it's called Where Does Your Poke Come From? Because not all of our big eye tuna comes from the same place. These tunas migrate all over the Pacific, and that can be very interesting for fisheries management. If you look at this map, this is a map of the Pacific here, and you can see all of the nations and their exclusive economic zones. That's kind of the blue areas out to 200 nautical miles, and all the white areas are actually international zones, international waters where nobody actually has exclusive fishing rights. And that's really where we have to negotiate for the most part. And so there's actually a couple of treaties out there, and our staff are responsible for negotiating with all of these countries to say, hey, where do you get to fish this year? And how much fish do you get to take? And so that's something they participate in annually. And these negotiations are really important. I wanted to show this slide just to share about kind of the impacts that this stuff can have. It's going to be very slow progress. Just as a nation, we don't always get what we want when we go into those negotiations. But sometimes we do have wins. And for example, in 2017, all the nations finally agreed to commit to a rebuilding plan for Pacific bluefin tuna. This was really critical because Pacific bluefin, one of the most prized species in the world, very expensive, also severely, severely depleted. It was not doing well to the point where we could lose, this stock. And we finally were able to get folks to agree to that rebuilding plan. And based on some recent stock assessments, so that was like in 2017, we had some updates from the science committees that study these fish, the Pacific bluefin tuna across the Pacific, and we're already hitting some of those rebuilding targets that were put into place in those plans. So it's like this work really does make a difference, and it does take a while sometimes to build that consensus with other nations, but when it happens, you can really see productive things happen. So we've already seen some of those tunas rebound and meet those initial targets. And then as recently as this year, the U.S. sponsored a proposal to ban certain types of gear that are used in fisheries and longline fisheries, and Canada also supported the proposal, and that other nations agreed to it. So now these two types of gear are banned in the region and in most areas, and so that's really a positive, and that was a lot of the leadership of the U.S. and kind of what our fisheries were doing locally. So back to the activity, I just wanted to give you that background, but this is a negotiation game. And so your students will represent 6 different nations, and they're going to be vying for these 5 different species on the table, or ocean, I should say. But instead of the species, they're going to be represented by candy. So each each type of tuna will actually have a type of candy associated with it. And so they get really excited about this part. Hopefully you're allowed to use candy in your classroom. I know sometimes it can be a little bit tricky, but essentially the game involves the students ranking their preferences for candy. So they're going to be with their nation, their team, and picking which candy they want to get, what they really like the most, what they don't like as a team. And you could actually poll your students ahead of time to kind of figure out what candies they like, what would maybe correlate with like bluefin tuna, where it's the most desirable amongst your class, for example. And then they're going to have a round where they fish. So if you look across this map here, this kind of shows our different treaties. So if you've ever played Settlers of Catan, it's a little bit like that, where you do a turn-taking thing. And so each nation will get to go fish, and they collect a certain number of fish in that round. But then they'll do that fishing in reverse order. And so that it's kind of fair, you know, everybody at least gets to fish relatively evenly and twice there. And then they'll also get to, then in the subsequent round, now you have your fish. You're going to reflect on that with your nation. And there's different roles in this game too. You'll have a head of delegation. They're a designated speaker for the activity. They're then going to go back to the table and negotiate within these treaties to get the fish, aka candy, that they want. So maybe you really wanted those Twix, but you have a ton of Skittles instead. So you're working with those other nations through this turn-taking and negotiation process to trade for resources. And then at the end of this exercise, hopefully everybody has at least a little bit of the candy they want, but they probably didn't get everything, and they're going to reflect on that experience and just what was easy about it, what was hard, you know, did they end up with what they wanted? Did other nations end up with what they wanted or not? And it's essentially mirroring what our managers do internationally when they go to advocate for the U.S. And so at the end of this, students will understand the economic value of these key species. They're going to learn a little bit about different fishing methods too, because we do introduce that in the PowerPoint, and then learn about how critical it is for these nations to work together to prevent overfishing, right? It can't just be one nation doing it. We need to work together. And then last but not least, and I know we are quickly moving through here, I wanted to talk about Pacific Aquaculture Challenge. So this is a third activity, and it's a really fun one. I love this because the diversity of this field in our region, Hawaii has some of the most incredibly diverse aquaculture. So everything from our local ES systems to novel uses of local ES systems. This is Kualoa's traditional fish pond, and they're actually growing oysters there, to amazing hatcheries that you'll see, land-based, to offshore net pens. And I threw this picture in too here on the right. This is actually folks at Symbrosia. They're researching growing limu to reduce methane emissions in cows. So there really are a lot of applications in aquaculture that may be of interest to your students. And we certainly won't touch on all of those today. We're going to focus on 3 primary systems, and I'll talk more about that. But I thought that Climate Connect was super cool with the methane, and it's really interesting. And aquaculture can be anything. It's not necessarily just fish. It could be limu. It could be multi-species together. You know, so for all food interests. So some of the challenges that your students will encounter in managing these systems, you know, they're common to some of them, and some of them are unique to each of the system settings. So, you know, things like rock wall damage in a local EA. How do we deal with that? Predators. You might find too many predators in your local EA, but you also might find predators bothering your net pen system in offshore waters. And then, you know, just a variety of things that really go into what's sustainable aquaculture. I think aquaculture might bring up a lot of things in mind for people, but it's really important to consider all of these things as you are developing your aquaculture system, whatever it may be. And there's resources for doing that within NOAA as well, which we share a little bit in the activity. And so looking in those 3 systems, essentially the students are, we actually have a couple of copies of this too, so you can break down the groups by size depending on what you need. But there's about 5 scenarios in each setting, and the students explore these different scenarios at their tables, and in each scenario there are solutions to choose from in terms of what would be the best choice for the environment. And sometimes there might be a choice that's okay, but there's always a best choice based on the information provided. And here's just an example, and I'll read it quickly. So Kavai wants to figure out the best place to site this farm. So she used an online tool called Ocean Reports to find a place that might work. After using it, she selected a few areas that seem to be good candidates, but she's unsure of whether they will interfere with other ocean users. So how can you help Kavai figure out the best location for the net pen? So this is in that, offshore net pen system. This is one of the key things when managers need to think about, hey, where can I put this, pen system? It's really important to consider all factors, environmental, other ocean users, shipping lanes. And so the students have an opportunity to kind of explore those solutions and make a decision based on that. And there are at least five for each setting. So there's a lot of topics you really get into around the environment there. So at the end of this, the students really recognize aquaculture as a source for sustainable, nutritious food. That's going to be a really important thing in our future with climate change. We need stuff to complement our wild-caught fisheries, and this is a really sustainable way to do it when aquaculture is done sustainably. And then students get to understand the challenges and opportunities that come with each system. You may be able to do certain things in one system than others. Some might be more expensive, so they'll really get to explore that. And then finally, how managers can address those challenges and improve productivity, but also while minimizing impact to the environment. And I think that's really important to just recognize, all things that we do really as humans can have an impact on the environment. So it's really important to minimize those and understand whether this decision is, worth what we're investing in getting a food resource in this case. And this is my contact info. I mentioned this to Joyce, but I'm happy to share with your students directly on these topics. I'd be happy to do like a hybrid version where I can share and then bring it to your classroom. So you could learn the activity thereafter. I also have kits that you can check out if you're interested. And I think that's it. What else was I going to say about this? And we're going to be doing a giveaway. Oh, and Joyce and Melissa will be sharing out these activities. So I hate to say I don't have these online just yet, but we will be bringing these online eventually. I have a lot of little bit of overhauling that I need to do to get these online, but we'll have a kind of an exclusive access for you just to view, so you can check it out a little further and see if this is something that might interest your students. So thanks everybody. I appreciate your attention.
That was great, Celeste. I feel like you really jammed through those 3 games. And everybody, I'm a 6th grade teacher, and I would really love to see my students doing some negotiating for candy. I think that would be really fun in the classroom, or negotiating for crackers. That might be a little better. That was really an excellent presentation. I got a lot from it. We're perfect on time. So we have 2 breakout sessions. Number one is going to be Phoebe's room, and number 2 is going to be Celeste's room. As participants, you get to choose your room, and you can also ask a question, and you can move rooms. All those things are fine with me. And fellows who are here, we have a few fellows. I'd like you to just turn on your cameras if you're willing, and just give a wave. We have a few fellows. That's Shale Shore, Melissa Keenan. We have Laura Cummings. Here she comes. Laura Cummings outside. And we have Fitz. What's your full name? John Fitzpatrick. Okay, awesome. And we have one more who's here, but she may have had to leave. And her name's Debbie Milken. Okay, so now I'm going to open up those breakout sessions. Here we go. Room 1 is Phoebe, and room 2 is Celeste.
I don't see it. Am I just not seeing it? Which is fine. That's fine.
Yours says unassigned. I don't know what that means.
That's okay. I can hang out here.
Awesome. Okay.
If you want to go into one of them, that's fine. I can stay here and
Yeah, do you want to choose the person who gets the game? We didn't decide how to do that.
oh, maybe at the end. Okay, so I can put everybody's name into into my little wheel spinner.
Okay, let's do it.
Well, it might be fun.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll load it in there now.
Okay. And at 1 minute left, I'll make an announcement. Come on back.
Okay, I wonder how I can see who's in each room right now.
Oh, I can see that.
Okay.
Do you, maybe if you go to participants, does it show you?
Mm-hmm. But I just have invite or copy invite link. Everyone. No. I can't see who's in the room.
Okay.
Can you just give me their first names and I'll type them in?
Yep. Bob.
Okay, hang on. All right. Bob.
Aaron.
Aaron.
That's an E. Yeah, E-R-I-N. Laura.
Laura.
Michelle.
Michelle.
Shale.
Shale.
Chris, spelled C-R-I-S.
Okay.
John. And Ronald. And Ronald.
Okay.
Good?
Yeah, that's it?
That's it.
Oh, so some of the other ones from the other breakout rooms, they didn't go. They just left.
Yeah.
Is that what happened? Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Okay.
So when I click this,
I predict it's going to be shale.
okay, so I'll redo it.
Yeah, that's the fun part, is you can redo it as many times as you want.
So we'll call them back.
Yeah.
And then whoever's still here will. Do you hear it?
I did hear it.
So I can share my screen like that. Can you see that?
I can see that.
Okay.
That's cute. What was the name of the game?
This is wheelofnames.com.
Yeah, what was the name of the poke game?
Oh.
Was it Where's Your Poke?
Where's your poke from?
Where's Your Poke from?
Uh-huh. Okay, how do we pull them back?
Okay, now, is it time?
Let's give them a 1 minute warning so you can come back and just thank everybody and remind them about the climate change if they're not in there already. You know.
Okay, I'm sending it out.
They come back so you can have a chance to win.
Yeah. Okay, I'm sending something. So,
okay.
And then I think it shouldn't go to you because you're not in a room.
Right.
And then I think when I close a room, I have a minute, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they have 60 seconds.
And then you're gonna put the link for our what schools could be thing in the chat. Do you want to do that? Or do you want me to do that?
I'd love you to do that.
Okay.
Miss double, triple computer screen over there.
I know, you can tell me I'm looking around at everything.
Okay, they're coming back in.
Okay.
I hope they had a great time in their little breakout sessions. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We're trying to end on time, which is always tricky. All right, so it looks like many people are back. Some people did not come back.
They don't get a chance to win. I'm going to remove their name.
We have six people in here, but that's okay. Let me just make sure they came back from their breakout rooms. Oh no, they're still in the room. They're coming back.
They're coming. They're coming.
Yeah, they're coming. Don't take them off the
They probably have a lot of questions for Phoebe. There's a lot to dig in there. Such good info.
There's a lot to talk about. Absolutely. And this is just, you know, it's amazing how needed these sessions are because we're just brushing the surface of so many topics, but these are very important topics. And as teachers, you've got to stick with it and keep learning. Okay, somebody's just coming back in. All right.
So we got Bob, Aaron, Laura, Michelle.
Are they back?
Michelle? I don't see Michelle. You?
I don't see Michelle, but maybe she left.
Yeah.
She's not on any of the lists. Is Bob back in here? There's Bob. Hey, Bob. All right, how about Leon? Is Leon here? Yeah, okay, we're ready to rock. So everybody, I hope that you enjoyed your breakout sessions with our two very impressive and knowledgeable presenters. We've been promised a raffle. So here's one of those great spinners that you can use in your classroom. And Missy, take it away.
I'm gonna spin it. Are you guys ready? Who's it gonna be? Bob!
Hey, right, Bob. That's awesome. So Bob, if you could type your information in the chat, like your name and school address, then we can have that sent to you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Right. The last,
Go ahead, Joyce. I'm going to put that in. You tell them.
okay, so the last thing that's really important is we would like all of you please to join our little climate change educators hui. And the hui is on what schools could be, which is sort of a forum and a platform for communicating with other educators. And we're really trying to build this network so that we can have these climate chats on different topics and interested teachers can attend. We appreciate all of you attending, and thank you again to our my co-facilitator, Melissa Keenan, and the two presenters, Phoebe and Celeste. You were wonderful. Thank you. Aloha, everyone. Hui ho.